Today we're looking at adding meaning into your camera movements. Everything you do in your film is saying something to your audience, whether intentionally or unintentionally, with the latter being the one that you want to steer clear of as much as possible. Whether it's a decision to add in a specific sound, show a violent moment, or cut away from it, or what today's episode is about, which is how you move your camera. Each of these decisions is saying something to your audience, whether you know it or even they know it. So before making the decision to move your camera or not, make sure you have a reason, since even the simplest of actions can say a whole lot. But before we jump into the meaning of shots, let's take a quick look at some basic movements. Of course, first you have the most basic of movements, which is panning with the camera in one position, just turning left or right, then tilting, which is the same but looking up or down. But you can do either of those on sticks or handheld, which will give a totally different feel or meaning. Then you also have a dolly in or out, which to illustrate this, I'm gonna throw my camera up on our e-image slider from iKan, and then we can push in or out, truck left or right, or instead of physically moving your camera, you could zoom, which we went in depth on zooms and dollies in this episode right here, so if you want more on that, there you go. Then you have a pedestal, which is moving your camera up or down vertically, which is done on an arm or something like a Fisher dolly, which is the same idea when doing it handheld as well. Then of course you have crane shots, which can also be called a jib or boom shot, but there you go. Pretty basic stuff. Now, how you choose to use those techniques or what tools you choose to use them with, like on a Steadicam or handheld, will say and do something totally different for your audience. Like the kinetic handheld work in Saving Private Ryan, the camera dipping in and out of water, falling, taking cover, giving us the feeling of looking through the eyes of a soldier, putting us right there in that horrible moment. And that overall look to the scene and all of the action scenes with that harsh camera work was a very specific decision from Spielberg, trying to mimic the look of the actual footage we've all seen from real combat cameramen, pushing that realism even further. Or another favorite example of mine here in Michael Mann's The Insider is this scene. Just as the conversation takes a turn and becomes more threatening, Mann chooses to truck right and shift the entire 180 on us, visually showing how things are flipping on our character. But let's jump into something more typical. For instance, take a walk and talk, which is what you actually call a dialogue scene when the characters are moving. And this is something that I actually talked about in an episode around 5 years ago, which definitely needs an update since I've grown and learned a lot as a filmmaker and disagree with myself slightly now. For instance, here's what I said then. Now, I'm not saying that every single time the camera moves there's some deep psychological meaning to it. That's not the case for me, and I think that's pretty much universal. There is such a thing as following the action, which is pretty straightforward, like dollying alongside of two people walking and talking. This sort of movement serves its purpose, but doesn't necessarily have any real meaning behind it. And now I don't think that's true. Also, I was really annoying, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know if I had too much coffee or too much cocaine, or both. Maybe I put the cocaine in the coffee thinking it was sugar. They look similar.
I've seen Wolf of Wall Street.
Me too. So let's revisit the idea of this moment. I'll toss my A7S on my iKan DS1 right here, which is a 3-axis gimbal, super light, unobtrusive, and awesome for traveling in tight spaces. It's like an Osmo for any camera you want within the weight limit, really. But with that, we'll grab our walk and talk. Their forward momentum in this moment, to me, feels like forward progression in their conversation. They're getting somewhere with what they're discussing. But let's say their conversation takes a turn. A moment hits where the conversation brick walls and gets intense. We can have our actors stop walking, visually stopping the progression of their discussion to underline the moment. Now we have our actors staying in one relative position to boost that tension and put them at a standstill visually and emotionally, which this isn't a camera move here, it's the decision against it and a conscious decision that I'm making to purposefully play my audience's emotions with the notes that I'm choosing instead of just playing by ear. But even as they stand still, we have the option of going lockdown and smooth or handheld, each of which is going to give the audience a totally different feel and message. The handheld look could be used to convey the internal turbulence of each of these characters, or you could go locked down, staying external and giving a silence before the storm type of feel perhaps. But let's look at this same situation in a slightly different way. If I have one character giving the other some important information, maybe important info that's time sensitive even, I can have them walk even faster. Having them in a hurried pace gives us a faster move and visually heightens the idea that all of this is time sensitive. Of course, this is heavily performance-based, but most of your movements should be. It's all about blocking as a whole, a dance between your characters and the camera. Now we have a few more examples to look at, but first, sponsor.
Okay. Don't do this to me, Bob. Hey, Ryan!
If you're a budding filmmaker, entrepreneur, or innovator, domain.com is the place to go when that next idea hits you. When you buy a domain from domain.com, you're taking the first step in creating an identity and vision for your brand or idea. The world's top 2 premier and most recognized domain extensions are .com and .net, which means those are the ones that are going to help you build your brand and expand your presence online the best. Of course, domain.com is reliable, affordable, and easy to use, but to give you some love, they're giving you 25% off their already affordable prices. When you get domain names, web hosting, and email, just use the coupon code FilmRiot at domain.com's checkout. And when you think domain names, think domain.com. Another thing that I showed on this old episode with that walk and talk, on a normal lens, like a 35 or a 50, we feel like we're with these characters. You were involved in their conversation. But if we back the camera up and zoom in, all of a sudden we feel like we're eavesdropping, not really part of the conversation anymore, just listening in. And we could take that even further and make it feel like a POV of someone who's watching them just by putting objects in the foreground. Take this shot here, just a handheld wide shot, but if we put the corner of the wall in the foreground and use it to make it feel like we're hiding, we're suddenly telling the audience that they're looking through someone's eyes, be it a killer or otherwise. Or throw the camera inside of a car. We sit in the passenger seat and film obviously through the window, and we are clearly telling the audience that this is a POV, which things like this are simple ways to convey to your audience that the character is being watched, that they aren't alone, or that danger is closer than they know. A great example of a different type of POV shot is the monster POV from The Evil Dead, which is just to point out that it doesn't have to be a human's POV you're looking through. So again, every decision that you make with your camera is conveying something to your audience. It's speaking directly to their subconscious or their intellect. To ignore that is to roll the dice with tone and meaning. And as I always say with episodes like this is really diving into the land of theory and my opinion, so don't take everything that I say as law. It's just a starting point to get you thinking deeper about how you use movement to tell your stories. Watch and analyze films for yourself. Dissect what those movements are saying to you. Gain that understanding by putting in the work. Don't be the current modern new filmmaker that just watches film essays and takes everything as fact. There are almost no rules in my opinion, so find your own voice with all of this. But that's it. As always, you can find links to the gear that we used in today's episode in the notes below, and I'll see you next week when I carry a nuke through a space portal in the sky.